What's up, everybody? It's your favorite music teacher, Mr. Ridley, and I'm so excited to be able to learn with you guys today. Now, today is the first day of one of my favorite months, October. It means Halloween's coming up. So I thought it would be a really good idea if we got to do some Just Dance songs that kind of fit that mood, okay? So when I say go, you're gonna pause this video and you're gonna go do those two Just Dance songs, and then you're gonna come back to this video for the rest of the lesson. Ready? Go! All right, so some of the things that we've been talking a lot about is a steady beat. And remember, a steady beat is something that stays the same in music. It's the heart of the music, it's the pulse, it stays the same. We also talked a lot about a rhythm. And remember, a rhythm is a pattern that changes. It does not stay the same. And after we learned about a rhythm, we started to talk about something called body percussion. And remember, when we did body percussion, we got to snap our fingers, we were patting our laps, we were clapping our hands, and we were stomping our feet to different rhythms that were a part of the songs, right? So I thought it would actually be a good idea if we kind of revisited that a little bit. So I'm gonna let you guys go and do one more body percussion song, just so you kind of remember what we were doing. All right, ready, go. All right, so hopefully you just did the body percussion video of High Hopes, and it's one of my favorite songs. And I think it's really, really cool to be able to do that with it. So what I actually want to talk to you guys today about is another form of percussion, but these are more traditional instruments, all right? Now, we're only going to be talking about some of those instruments, the ones that don't necessarily have different notes, but can play a lot of different rhythms. Do you guys know what kind of instruments I'm talking about? Drums, right? So I want to show you one drum that's very, very special to me. This drum is called the djembe. Now, it is actually a drum that came from Africa, and I am so lucky that I had a friend who was able to visit the country and then came back and actually brought me the drum. So this is a real African djembe drum, all right? Now, djembe drums are usually made out of wood, as you can see here. They have really cool designs. They don't all necessarily have those designs. You can see there's Africa right there. It's really cool, right? They also have the top part of the drum right here. That's called the head of the drum. Every drum has a drum head where the majority of the sound usually comes from, all right? Now, I actually forgot to say this, but I want to make sure that I say that before I talk any more about the djembe drum. What makes a percussion instrument a percussion instrument? A percussion instrument becomes a percussion instrument because it's something that you either hit or strike using different things, all right? That is what defines a percussion instrument, okay? So remember that. We're gonna be talking about that a lot, okay? So going back to the djembe, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit more about it. Like I said, this is the head of the djembe drum. Now, most drums actually originated from Africa and from the Native Americans that were here in the US. And they actually kind of made the drums the same way, even though they didn't use the same materials. So what happened was, when they would hunt animals, animals for meat, they would use the skin or the fur from the animals as clothing, but they didn't want any part of that animal to go to waste. They were really, really resourceful. So what they would do is, after they would skin the animal, and it sounds kind of weird, but what they would do is they would use that skin of the animal to become the top of the drum. So originally, drum heads were made out of animal skin, and that's because they were really, really resourceful, and they wanted to make sure that they used all of the resources that they actually had, all right? Nowadays, we have things that aren't necessarily made out of animal skin, so you don't have to worry about hitting a dead animal or anything like that, all right? Now, the other thing I want to show you is that this drum has a hole on the bottom. A lot of drums don't necessarily have that, but this one does, because the sound, when I play, you're gonna hear it's gonna come out of the bottom, all right? So I'm gonna play a little bit of it, but before I do, let me just tell you, Mr. Ridley can play a lot of instruments, but I'm not a professional percussionist. So as I show you a lot of instruments today, I'm just gonna play a little bit so that you get an idea of how it sounds, how you're supposed to play it. But of course, I'm always gonna attach another video with it so you really understand what's going on, all right? So let me play a little bit of the djembe so you can hear what it sounds like. put it in my lap just like this. I'm putting it a little bit higher up than you would normally play. And it just sounds like this. So that's a little bit of what the djembe sounds like, all right? And djembes can come in different sizes, but they are still called djembes, all right? Now, I want to show you more traditional instruments that we usually see here in Florida or in the United States, all right? One of those drums is the snare drum. Now, this snare drum that I'm about to show you actually belonged to my brother. So when my brother was in school, he used to play the drum, so I got this drum for him. So it looks a little bit older, all right? But this is what we call a snare drum. Just like the djembe, it has the head of the drum right here. And when you play the drum, you're gonna hit this part of the drum, right? Also, you see that it's not made out of the same material as the djembe. This one is made out of metal. So drums can be made out of wood, they can be made out of plastic, and they can also be made out of metal, all right? But what makes this drum a snare drum? These little beads that you see on the bottom of the drum are called snares. You kind of hear it. Those snares are what make a snare drum. So what happens is, on the side of the drum right here, there's a little lever I can press. And when that happens, when I press that lever, the snares tighten up on the drum, and it becomes a different sound. Unfortunately, my brother didn't do such a great job of taking care of his instruments. That's why I always tell y'all we gotta take care of our stuff. So this one doesn't have the snare drum sound. So when I play it, it's gonna sound a little different, not necessarily like a regular snare drum. But of course, I'm definitely gonna show you guys a video of a professional snare drum player, all right? Now, when you play the snare drum, of course, you're not gonna use your hands. That's not how you play the snare drum. You're gonna use something called drumsticks. Drumsticks are usually made out of wood, just like that, all right? They also can be made out of plastic right here, but that tip part, the little rounded off part, that part is always made out of wood because it changes the sound if it's made out of something else, all right? So I'm gonna play a little bit of the snare drum for you so you can hear what it sounds like, but then after this, of course, I want you to go see a professional snare drum player. Ready? So that's a little bit of what the snare drum sounds like if the snares are a little bit loose. Now, I actually want you to listen to a professional snare drum player who's gonna have his snares on, all right? And I want you to hear the difference between the two snares, all right? So when I say go, you're gonna pause this video and I want you to go and listen to that snare drum player. Ready? Go. All right, and that was really cool, right? I wish I could play like that. Now, I want to show you something else that's really cool. Because the snare drums or drums in general can be kind of loud, it can be kind of hard to practice when you're at home. But as a musician, one thing that you always have to do is you have to practice. If I want to be good, just like he was playing Old Town Road, I got to be able to practice, right? But you may not be able to bring that drum home, so we have things that are called practice pads. See how small it is? This practice pad represents a snare drum. It still has the head of a snare drum, and it still has the outer part. Remember I said it could be made out of different things. It could be made out of metal, it could be made out of wood, or it could be made out of plastic. This one is made out of plastic, all right? It makes a lower, not a lower sound, it makes a quieter sound, okay? So when I play, see if you can hear the difference, okay? So that's me playing the practice pad of the snare drum. It was a lot quieter, right? It's the same thing as the snare drum, the same idea, except it's quieter. Now I want to show you another practice pad that's really cool. Now Mr. really doesn't actually have this drum. I wish I did, but it's really, really long, and I can't play that one. But I want to show you the practice pad of it. Ugh. This is a practice pad of a drum that's called the tenor drum, all right? The tenor drums usually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 different drums that are connected, but they are all different sizes, all right? Now, one thing I didn't say that's really, really important is the smaller the instrument, the higher the sound. The bigger the instrument, the lower the sound. And since this drum has drums that are different sizes, they're going to make different sounds. Not necessarily playing different notes, but they're going to sound a little bit different. So that's why the tenor drum is a little bit different than the snare drum. The tenor drum also doesn't have the actual snares that are on the bottom of it, so it doesn't have that sound that the snare drum has, all right? So I'm going to play a little bit of this practice pad. It's going to sound very similar to the practice pad of the snare drum because it's just a practice pad. But of course, after I show you this, I want you guys to go and watch a professional tenor drum player, all right? So put it in my lap just like this. You're going to use drumsticks with this, or you can use another kind of stick that I'm going to show you in a minute, all right? That is a little bit of what a tenor drum practice pad sounds like, all right? Now, before I actually let you guys look at a professional tenor drum player, this video that we're gonna watch actually has another kind of drum in it that I really want you guys to see. And we're gonna talk about that drum a little bit beforehand so that we can look at it all together, okay? So we already talked about a djembe. We already talked about a snare drum a little bit. We talked about a tenor drum a little bit. And I want to talk to you about what is the big drum. And that drum is the bass drum, right? Now, this drum I'm going to show you is a representation of the bass drum. It's not exactly the bass drum, but it's very, very similar. This is called a hand drum. Hand drum is very, very similar to a bass drum, except it's just not as big and it's more easy to hold. It's kind of like a practice pad for the bass drum, right? Now, if you look at it, this again is called the head of the drum. Now, as I said earlier, most drum heads are made out of animal skin, but remember, a lot of drums now aren't made out of animal skin. They're made out of something that looks like it and sounds like it, but is actually safe and it's not made out of animal. So this one isn't made out of that, all right? But when I play it, I can use two things. I can use my hand. Hey, hey. I can use my hand, or I can use something called a mallet. Now, a mallet looks very different than a drumstick. This is just one example of a mallet. There's so many different mallets that are out there. Let's look at the difference between the mallet and the drumstick. One's a little bit shorter, right? And this one has a more rounded head to it, or a more rounded top to it. And that is because it's going to end up making a different sound on that drum. This head is actually a softer head. It's not as hard as the wooden head on a regular drumstick, all right? It's because that drum, if you hit it with the drumstick, it's going to end up damaging the drum, and it's going to make a hole in it, all right? So the mallet's head can either be made out of a plastic, a rubber. This is kind of a rubber, but it's usually something that's very soft. And sometimes they would even put yarn on it to make the sound softer. And we're going to end up looking at some of that stuff next week, all right? But I want you to hear how the hand drum sounds with a mallet. It sounds very different than if I used my hand, right? It's a much louder sound, more crisp, right? So that is an example. Even though this is a hand drum, it's kind of, like I said, the practice pad of the bass drum, okay? So now what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to look at another video that's gonna show you a whole, not a whole bunch, excuse me, all three of the drums that we kind of just talked about. The snare drum, the tenor drum, and the bass drum. You're gonna get to see all three in the video. While you're watching the video, there's a couple of things I really want you to pay attention to. You're gonna hear this beeping noise at the beginning of the video. That beeping noise is what we call a metronome. If you're listening to the beeping noise, you're gonna realize that it's staying the same. It's staying the same because a metronome is the steady beat. Remember, as a percussionist, as a musician, we all got to stay on the same beat so that we sound good together. So you're going to hear that beeping noise that's happening throughout the entire video. Also, if you look, you're going to see their feet kind of move to the beeping noise, and that's for them to make sure that they stay in the correct time with the music, okay? All right, so when I say go, you're going to go look at that video of a drum line, and then you'll come back to this one, all right? Ready? Go. All right, guys. So like I said, today was really just an introduction of different percussion instruments. And I know a lot of people really want to be percussionists when they grow up. So this is a good way for you to be able to do it, okay? Now, last thing I want to do before we go is I do want you to watch one more video that talks about a lot of different percussion instruments, and it shows you those different percussion instruments. So after the video, there's not going to be a written assignment that's going to go along with it because it may take you a little bit longer to watch the entire video, but make sure that you watch all those videos that are attached with the lesson because they all show you really good examples of traditional percussion instruments that are non-tonal. Non-tonal meaning they don't have different notes that they play. They play one note, all right? All right, guys. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. I'm so excited that it's October, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. All right, be safe.